is 5:20 in the east, 3:20 out in the mountain time zone where I am located, and I would have to check my phone to see. Actually, I will check really quickly to see what time it is. Apple has this really cool world clock in the Czech Republic. It's 11:21 in the Czech Republic, and that's where the NHL season gets underway tomorrow with Nashville and San Jose. I believe it's a noon Eastern start. I'd have to double check on that. So if you're in a fantasy league, you need to be aware that this season starts in Europe tomorrow, but the rest of the offseason continues in Canada and in North America until the season gets going next Tuesday, as we are joined by Michael Amato, as he does every Thursday, and quite a weird situation with that European start tomorrow. In one of our leagues, we're having those two teams. You just have to be cap compliant with your players, and you could still do the rest of your preseason stuff, but kind of throws a wrench into fantasy leagues, doesn't it?
Yeah, only one more night left here with everyone's fantasy draft still looking perfect before the season gets underway. But yeah, it does. I think most leagues have I think this week and next week combined into one matchup if you're doing head to head.
Right.
But yeah, it's obviously something you have to be prepared for. Make sure if you have any Sharks or Preds players, you get them in the lineup, because there's obviously still preseason games going on tomorrow and Saturday, which is weird. It almost has that feel of like a couple years ago. I don't know I think it was the Flames and the Canucks playing like regular season games during the playoffs there for a week. It kind of has that weird feeling of like, hey, we got some games that really count in the standings, but there's also preseason games. So yeah, it's weird. It's also interesting because I think a lot of people probably have already completed their drafts by now, and just to get these games in. But yeah, if there's an injury in some of these preseason games, that's not going to be good if you drafted anybody. So we'll see.
Yeah, it is. It's a really bizarre situation when you have preseason games, and I'm not a huge fan of these trips, although I do like these trips if a team is going to do it at the start of the season rather than midway through the season. That midway European trip seems crazy weird to me, and the NFL does it. They're doing it again this week. At the start of the season, get it out of the way and then get your system back to normal, because there is an adjustment, obviously, to the time.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think obviously the NFL, they can do it because they get a week off, and
Right.
I think a lot of the teams have buys sometimes after. But yeah, it would be really tricky in the NHL to do that from a scheduling perspective.
So we're going to give away a Dobber Hockey Fantasy guide in our conversation today to some lucky listener or viewer. But we're also going to talk about some really interesting situations around the National Hockey League. First of all, this wasn't really on our list, but Jason Robertson signs his deal late last night. Here are the details. This guy, there's a chance he could score 50 in this contract. This is a really good deal for the Dallas Stars. If it works out for Jason Robertson, they're going to pay a lot, similar to Matthew Tkachuk. But to get this done, first of all, for the season was important. And if you're in a cap league and you have Jason Robertson, you love that number. Hello?
Hello?
Oh, can you hear us? Did we
Still
lose
here,
you there?
Yep.
Oh.
Sorry, just for a second, yeah.
Oh, sorry, we lost you. Anyway, I was just asking about this contract for the Dallas Stars. And if you're in a cap league, you love that number. The Dallas Stars love that number. The number could get a lot bigger, but right now is what's important in the big scheme of things is getting him on the ice.
Yeah, I'm actually somewhat surprised with that number. Some of the contracts we saw recently with Stützle, Kyrou, and then the other day with Barzal, I thought Robertson would come in a lot higher than what it did. But yeah, that's a pretty good bargain for the Stars. Fingers crossed he won't miss any regular season games, because it looks like he'll have some time to get ready to go. I thought it might have been like a Brady Tkachuk situation last year where he missed the first handful of games, but yeah, they got him in. That's great value for them, and 4 years. So yeah, should be a good deal for all sides, and that's pretty good value for him.
Yeah, and there's a chance you can get a 50-goal guy out of $7.75 million. It's pretty amazing. So anyway, one of the things we wanted to talk about is people in new places, and for that means coaches as well, and we know coaches and managers have the biggest impact on where your players play and how they play. And this is going to be an interesting study in New York with the Islanders, because Lambert is in his first year as a head coach. 11 years with Nashville, Washington, and New York, otherwise known as the Barry Trotz School of Coaching, and he has a PhD from that institution. But what are your expectations for Lambert on Long Island this year and the players that he'll be coaching?
Yeah, it's interesting because everyone seems like, from a fantasy hockey world, everyone seems really excited that Trotz is out of there, because they think a lot of the Isles players might get a little bit more leeway, might be put up a little bit more offensive numbers. But as you mentioned, Lambert is a direct disciple of Barry Trotz. He's been with him forever. So I'm not sure how different their coaching styles are going to be. So I think there might be a lot of disappointed people hoping for the Matt Barzals or the Oliver Wallstroms to really kind of take off for a huge season. And yeah, I think with him, I think everyone there is most concerned with Barzal because he had such a strong rookie season, and he's kind of faded a bit since then. Not that he's been a bad player, but I think he went from an 85-point guy in his rookie season to around a 60-point player. And it just makes you wonder how much Trotz's coaching had to do with that, or how much was that playing with John Tavares as a rookie that one season just really kind of amped him up. And now, he's kind of lost that, and he played with a more defensively structured coach, obviously, and that's brought him down. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Typically, coaches that have been with another coach for a long time, obviously they share the same system or believe in the same systems and philosophies. So yeah, I'm not super confident we're going to see this new Isles team, just lighting up the lamp and running all over the ice. I think it'll probably be pretty similar, but maybe some of the line deployments and when they use players might be a bit different.
Yeah, and I guess the hope is that Lambert has always wanted to be a more offensive coach, and hopefully he sort of brings that to the Islanders, right? And he just was kind of saddled with the way Barry Trotz coached, which obviously wasn't bad because he had some great success in winning a Stanley Cup. Another guy on a new bench, and it's funny, Peter DeBoer has been unemployed for about 5 minutes since he got into the NHL. He went from Florida straight to Jersey, straight to San Jose, straight to Vegas, which is a lot different than the next guy we're going to talk about after, Bruce Cassidy, who waited a long time before his second job. But Peter DeBoer keeps getting jobs, so something he must be doing right. And he's been to the finals twice with 2 teams. How is this going to impact Dallas? Obviously, he's really happy because he has his number 1 scoring option coming back soon. He's got a good young goaltender. What are the expectations in Dallas for star players?
Well, I think everyone is most interested in how DeBoer will sort of help Miro Heiskanen. Heiskanen is one of those players that is phenomenal in real life, but in fantasy, he's not that. He's not that great of an asset. He's a good player, but I think everyone always expects more from him. And when you have him on your roster, I think you're always a little bit underwhelmed, just because, he does a lot of things well. He skates really well. He moves the puck really well, but a lot of times those things don't translate to fantasy as much. And I think now I think people are thinking with John Klingberg gone, maybe Heiskanen's going to get more of a featured role. And if you look back at some of the stops DeBoer had on your list there, in Vegas, he did a really great job with Shea Theodore. I think in San Jose, Brent Burns. DeBoer likes to get puck to the net from the point quite a bit. He's kind of that style of coach, and I think those guys are able to pick up a lot of points that way. And I wonder if he'll have that effect on Heiskanen, because I think a lot of people are looking at this year as the chance that Heiskanen breaks out.
Yeah, and guys like that, people have been waiting, and I look at I know he's not on this list, but the one good thing about John Tortorella in Philadelphia, I don't know if there's going to be a whole lot, but I think he helps the defense. Maybe a guy like Provorov, like he did with Jones and Werenski. So there's certainly some guys. And if you haven't done your draft, then maybe you bump Heiskanen up a bit. And if you have, maybe you watch a little bit and put him on that watch list. And maybe you target somebody a little bit earlier. You target Heiskanen from another team a little bit earlier if you see that instant bump in the first few games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could see how he'll start deploying him. Maybe he'll get a little bit more power play time. It's just DeBoer's always had a really good impact on those high end defensemen, and yeah, his teams are usually really strong, and that means they'll put up a lot of points. And yeah, you mentioned Tortorella. Just yeah, like you said, I think he will have an impact on the defensive end in Philly. Probably not as many Flyers are fantasy relevant, but yeah, he's always a great coach that preaches block shots. So if you're looking for a defenseman and you have a league with blocks, you could maybe look at some players like Provorov and stuff like that, because Tortorella is definitely good in that area.
Yeah, I think Ivan Provorov still has a massive ceiling. He's just been mired in a really, really tough situation there in Philly. Like, we did the Flyers the other day in my preview, and oof, it's like a Carter Hart, I think, could be a really good fantasy player if you get decent points for shots, because he's going to face a lot of rubber in Philly. It's going to be an interesting one as well. Bruce Cassidy on here. The impact for Bruce Cassidy is twofold. One on the team he's leaving and one on the team he's joining. And you can kind of see there, this is what I was talking about with guys getting their second chance. I mean, it took Bruce Cassidy a long time to get back behind an NHL bench. He was, as a head coach, rather. He's had a small stint with the Capitals, and then he was at the Bruins for however many years, 6 years there, 6 times in the playoffs, the finals in 2015. But we did hear players were unhappy. And then we did see players coming back to Boston when Cassidy leaves. So let's start with Boston and the impact Bruce Cassidy leaving is going to have on the Bruins.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about Barry Trotz earlier. I actually think Bruce Cassidy was probably the most defensive-minded coach or goalie-friendly coach in the league in the past 5 years. And I know a lot of people Trotz will first come to mind, but I think Cassidy really had a huge impact. If you look at Boston's goalies, and I know Tuukka Rask obviously had a lot to do with it, but I think Boston in the last 5 years have ranked in the top 5 in goals against in each of the past 5 seasons. And I think 3 times they were first, actually. And yeah, a lot of that credit would go to somebody like Tuukka Rask. But if you look at the other goalies that have come through that system, whether it's like Yaroslav Halak, Jeremy Swayman, Linus Ullmark, these aren't necessarily like huge names, but they've all been really viable fantasy options. And I think a lot of that has to do with Cassidy and his defensive structure. They're really strong in that regard. So I'm really curious to see how him leaving is going to impact. Obviously, it's somebody like Jeremy Swayman, who's pretty young, doesn't have a ton of experience, maybe loses that structure a little bit. We'll see what sort of systems Jim Montgomery employs. But yeah, I think that's going to hurt them. And obviously, you add in, they're going to be missing some key players for the first couple months. McAvoy, Marchand, they might be playing in their own end a little bit more because, they're missing some of their talented players. That's going to put a little bit more pressure on the goaltending. So I think that combined with Cassidy leaving makes me really curious to see, how Swayman and Ullmark are going to do. I know a lot of people really didn't bump Swayman down at all in their rankings this year, but I'm interested to see if that impacts them a little bit.
Yeah, I was one of those guys that I was really high, and now I'm thinking, maybe, especially, with McAvoy and Marchand out, I'm like, maybe that wasn't the greatest thing. At midseason, I think Jeremy Swayman could be a really good trade target because in fantasy, because then, everybody's coming back and they should, I don't know. I don't think the Bruins are going to win their division, but I'd be shocked if they aren't a playoff team. Like, everybody gets back, the band gets back together. They just have to tread water. So Swayman might be a better guy in midseason or quarter away through the season when maybe they've gotten over that rough patch.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think if they're going to have some struggles and some issues, you'll probably see it in October, November, maybe before the new year. And then, yeah, like you said, I think once the calendar turns, if they're all healthy, I think they'll be fine again. And yeah, I think they'll probably be a playoff team. They'll probably just have to fend off Ottawa, I would think, this year. We'll see if they can do that. But yeah, I think in the last few years too, and maybe this is my mistake too, a lot of people just count out Boston because they say, they're getting older. Patrice Bergeron is whatever, 37 years old now, I think. And they've got David Krejci and Marchand's up there, but they just keep playing at an elite level. Like, a lot of their skaters aren't showing any really signs of regression. So that's one thing going for if you're counting on a lot of Bruins players this year.
And then the Bruce Cassidy Vegas effect, and this makes so much more sense now to me in my head anyway, of why Kelly McCrimmon went out and brought in Bruce Cassidy, because I think it's clear goaltending is going to be the weakest spot and the biggest challenge for Vegas, because they knew Robin Lehner was out for the year, so they get a guy who is goaltender friendly with guys like Laurent Brossoit, Logan Thompson, etc. It's going to be needed in Vegas. I think I like their top six. I like their blue line, but this is a smart move to have a goalie-friendly coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably why they were maybe a little more confident of not going out and bringing in a bigger name when they knew Leonard was going to be injured. I know they brought in Aiden Hill, and yeah, you mentioned a couple of others, Thompson and Brossoit. I think maybe Vegas is a little more confident having Cassidy there, that they can play a structure that's going to kind of protect those three a bit, whoever they end up rolling with to start. But yeah, I think he's a great fit there. We know Vegas has a lot of talent in the top six, as you mentioned. They have some really good defense core as well. So yeah, I think if they can just get even league average, above league average goaltending slightly, I think they'll be fine. And I think Cassidy kind of helps them get there.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some players now. And then the one guy we're talking about is Patrick Kane. And I think he's trying to listen for some teammates right there to say, like, who is left and what is next? And this is Patrick Kane over the last 4 years. So he's not regressing by any means. I have him having a massive year this year. What do you expect from Patrick Kane? I think, like I said, I think he's going to have a great year. I think eventually he gets traded, which takes his value up even more. But what's going on in Chicago, in your opinion, and what should people expect out of Kane and maybe Taves, who those guys look a lot younger than they are right now? And man, they're doing the old Will Smith, looking around the room, wondering where everybody went.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think Taves is probably having a more difficult time with it than Kane. I think you're right. I think Kane will probably be able to keep his numbers pretty close to what they normally are. Like maybe they take a little bit of a hit because he's never really been completely alone. I know he's always had somebody on his line that's really strong, whether it was Panarin or DeBrincat, but Chicago kept sort of offloading those guys for cap reasons. I think maybe DeBrincat I think they're just going into a rebuild. But yeah, I think they're going to be in full Connor Bedard mode this year, Chicago. So it's probably not going to be too many players on the Blackhawks you're going to want to roster. I think Kane is one. I think Seth Jones is one. But there's not going to be too many outside of that. But yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned that's actually really important with Kane, if you're debating on taking him, is that trade element. If he gets moved to a contender at the deadline, that's really going to boost his value right around the time of fantasy hockey playoffs, obviously. So yeah, if he ends up, because I think it's probably safe to say that Chicago's going to eat some of his contract and maybe even a third team. So I think he can go almost anywhere. If he goes to like a Colorado or like New York or Toronto, I think that could be huge for your playoff run if you're holding on to Kane and he ends up, in the top six on one of those teams for a month going into the playoffs. It's going to be really good value for you.
Yeah, and I often wonder, is there a chance Kane and Taves would be like, hey, we'll stick around to play with Bedard because it would be fun, but there's no guarantee they're getting Bedard. So they could stick around for the whole year hoping to play for Bedard and end up picking second and not getting Bedard, and then what it is. So listen, I know there's that legacy factor in the NHL, but rebuilding and winning is much more important, in my opinion, than a guy playing his whole year with one team, in my opinion. So I think at least Kane gets traded. And, what team wouldn't want Jonathan Taves for the playoffs? I mean, that's a really good guy to bring in at some point, or next year when they become free agents, if they decide to keep playing in Taves' case. So I think both of them end up getting dealt personally.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's just really hard. Like you mentioned, that legacy player, it's really hard now with the salary cap for that one player to stick, his whole career with one team, because you just see so many, kind of peaks and valleys with teams and teams go on a great run and then the cap hits you and you have to kind of start fresh and rebuild. And so it's really hard for, a lot of players to sit through that. And to be fair to Kane and Taves, I think they've been there's been a few lean years now in Chicago that they've stuck around. But yeah, I think they probably can see this one's going to be a little bit longer, and they're probably going to want to go. I could see them trying to take a shot at a cup at the deadline, like you mentioned, and maybe they can sign somewhere where they want in the summer.
Yeah, and like they've been great players for that organization. They haven't come out and complained or anything so they're doing all the right things. The Oilers hope they've done the right things in net. Jack Campbell, 47 games last year he started. That's a career high. That tells you that Jack Campbell has not been, in my opinion, a number one goaltender, has not played the number one goaltender numbers. So is this something you're going to be watching this year in Edmonton?
Yeah, that's one thing I was a little bit concerned about with Campbell. He's had a real good shot the last 2 years in Toronto, but obviously he was with Frederik Andersen for a season and then Peter Mrazek. And even though Mrazek didn't have a great year last year, he's still a veteran guy with a lot of experience that the Leafs could turn to. So yeah, I think it sounds like Mike Smith's not really going to be an option this year because of injuries. So it's going to be, I think, Campbell and Stuart Skinner. So it's going to be interesting. I know from his time here in Toronto, he had a little bit of durability issues. There were some times where he would play like 3 or 4 games in a row, and then the team would sort of sit him out for a game because he needed a bit of a break. And yeah, like you mentioned, 47 games, a career high. If you're a number one goalie, I think even now with a lot more splits and tandems, you still probably need to be in that 55 game mark. So yeah, if he has to play 55, 60 games, will his numbers dip a little bit? He was a little bit streaky last year, obviously great first half, not so good second half. And I think the Oilers obviously are probably not going to want to play Stuart Skinner a ton because he's so young. But we'll see if Campbell can carry the load there. He's certainly on a really good team, really strong team. So it'll be interesting. And maybe that's a reason to, keep an eye on Stuart Skinner on your waiver wire, right? Does Skinner get in 35 games this year, maybe? And on a really strong team, that could be some sneaky value for you as well.
Yeah, I actually think Stuart Skinner is going to challenge Jack Campbell more than people think. I think still Jack Campbell's going to be the guy, but that's a really good point. Stuart Skinner could get you some nice backup points in fantasy. And now Johnny Gaudreau, there was a lot of big stories in the offseason. Maybe none more surprising than this one, when everybody thought he was going to Philly or the Islanders, and Columbus seemed to come out of nowhere. I'll say this. I don't think Matthew Tkachuk or Johnny Gaudreau, I think they both take dips this year. I think Jonathan Huberdeau is going to take an uptick. So I think out of those situations, he's going to be the guy that's going to improve. I'm not saying that Gaudreau doesn't have options, but I don't like his options in Columbus as much as I liked him in Calgary. Where do you see Gaudreau and Columbus and that whole fit?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think obviously he's a tremendous player, and I think he'll play with Patrick Laine. And I think the thing is, Laine is just a different player than Tkachuk and Lindholm, right? Like, he's a finisher. He's not necessarily a go into the corners guy and get the puck like Tkachuk is and like Lindholm is. And obviously there's going to be a third player on that line, whether it's Boone Jenner or Jack Roslovic or somebody else that's not going to be as strong as the other two that Gaudreau played with last year. So obviously I think he's probably going to bring more to the Blue Jackets and to that line than the team is giving to him. But yeah, I'm with you. I think both him and Tkachuk probably come back down a little bit more this year. I think Tkachuk more than Gaudreau, but still, yeah, I think it'll be a different experience for him, kind of not having maybe some of those workhorse players around him that are going to dig up the puck and get him the puck a lot. Even he'll probably have to play without the puck a lot more this year in Columbus, which will be an adjustment. But yeah, I think he's definitely gonna prop up guys like Laine and whoever gets that center spot. So though I think those guys might be, obviously if you have a chance to get Gaudreau, he's still a great player, but those guys might be more ones to look at, as he's going to probably help them more than they're going to help him.
Yeah, and I think Werenski maybe gets a bit of an uptick with a guy like Gaudreau as well, as we saw some defensemen do it. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I give Columbus a lot of credit for going out and doing it and see if they can build around them. I have a former Columbus head coach winning the Jack Adams this year. This is my top 3 candidates for the Jack Adams. I'm bullish on the Rangers. I think Gerard Gallant's a really good players coach. Jared Bednar obviously gets some consideration, and the coach of the year always seems to be a little bit of a most improved trophy. So DJ Smith gets my nod. What do you think? Is anybody doesn't belong on this list, do you think?
No, I think those are three good candidates. I think one other name I would just mention. You mentioned it's a lot of times goes to the most improved, and I wonder if we mentioned Lane Lambert earlier. If the Islanders have a bounce back season, like a lot of people think they might be able to, if he gets some consideration as well, because I think last year they just had a perfect storm of injuries and an early bout with COVID that just kind of sunk them. So I think they're actually a lot better than they showed last year. So if they can bounce back, I think Lambert might also be in the mix.
Very cool. And lastly, I'll just throw up my. This is my projected. Actually, I'll throw up. This is the top scoring right wingers according to NHL.com. I know guys move around. It's harder and harder to narrow down positions these days, but these are the top scoring right wingers from last year. And this is my prediction for top scorers. I'm not bullish on Tampa Bay this year, except Kucherov, because he's missed time. The other guys have played so much. And I think Tage Thompson steps up. I think Svechnikov has a bit of year. I think Mark Stone has a bounce back because of Jack Eichel. But, everybody has their predictions, and this is what I'm looking at for right wingers this year. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think anybody else maybe I'm missing out on or not giving enough credit?
I like the Kucherov pick up there. I think he's going to be really good value in drafts. I think a lot of people are scared off by some of the injury concerns you mentioned, but his points per game have been off the charts. They always are. So if he can stay healthy, I can see him having a huge year. I also like your inclusion of Vladimir Tarasenko in a contract year. He seems to be a guy that plays really well. Nobody wanted him last year in a trade. He came out, had a great season. I think in a contract year, he could do the same again. But I think this list looks pretty complete. I think you could also have maybe William Nylander on there. Could be for a big year. But it looks good.
That's one thing about fantasy is knowing, this is a contract. Like John Klingberg, I think it's a contract year for year. I think he's going to be big. Yep. I put him in the Norris conversation because I think he's going to have a big bounce back. And also, I have him in fantasy, and I like to push out positive karma to my players sometimes. So give them a bit of a boost. But a contract year is such a big thing to know about when a player, because we often see the motivation goes up quite a bit.
Yeah, like it's a prove-it deal for Klingberg. And you look at someone like Nazem Kadri last year, took advantage of it, right? Had a huge fantasy season. So, definitely stuff to watch for.
Yeah, guys betting on themselves for sure. Michael, this has been a lot of fun. Next week, when we're chatting, we are actually going to be talking about guys and fantasy points already. We can get into some specific matchups. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I know people are going to enjoy your stuff, obviously, at Sportsnet, at Goalie Post, Dobber Hockey, and we're going to give away a Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide here when we wrap up as well. So thank you so much, as always, for joining me every Thursday, and I can't wait for the season to start tomorrow, and the real season, the actual season, to start next week. Thanks so much, man.
No problem. Looking forward to the real games. Thanks, Dean.
There is Michael Amato. And I don't know what is going on with the keyboard, but that was fun. I think it's interesting. Sometimes you just look at who's the best players. I'm going to try to draft these best players. But you need to know contract year, type of coach, coaching change, all these different things play huge roles in playing time and all kinds of things like that. Okay, so if you would like to win a Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide, here's the question. You have to be in our Twitch chat. You have to drop the answer in the Twitch chat. First person to answer this question will win a Dobber Fantasy Hockey Guide. All right. In that conversation we just had with Mike, name the first coach we talked about. Who was the first coach we talked about in that segment? He's a first ever head coach in the NHL. That's your hint. And he replaced a Stanley Cup champion. That's your other hint. If you can drop the name of the first coach Mike and I discussed in the Twitch chat, I will be getting in your hands a Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide, and they are awesome. Up to date. They updated them recently. The one I have is a little bit old. I haven't updated, but they've updated, and it's going to help you. Even if your draft is over, it is going to help you find the right guys. And Arnie gets it. Lane Lambert. There you go, Arnie. We will get the fantasy guide emailed to you directly. Commissioner Andrea will get that sent out. Thank you very much for playing along, Arnie. I like that. I didn't hear you from you all show, and then you drop in a Lane Lambert. Nice.